In 1510, Alfonso de Albuquerque captured Goa with the help of local Hindu groups who were discontented with the Muslim rulers of the Bijapur Sultanate. But they would soon realize their mistake. A single tulsi plant in your backyard or one bowl of rice cooked without salt could lead to you being declared a heretic and burnt at the stake. This wasn't just happening here. Across the world, in Mexico, Colombia, and Peru, the Catholic Church launched its Inquisition, destroying native gods and erasing thousands of years of culture within a generation. But somehow, they failed to completely erase the culture. This is a story of Goan Inquisition. Medieval Europe was a religious theocracy ruled by the Pope. The Bible was a Latin cage since the common man couldn't read it. Priests held a total monopoly on truth. To disagree was heresy, punishable by death. In 1229, the Church launched its first Inquisition in France to crush dissent. It was a total success. But by 1500s, the monopoly cracked. Martin Luther translated the Bible into German, and church began losing its grip on Europe during the Protestant Reformation. As they lost ground in the West, the church turned their eyes to the Americas and the East to find new markets for the cross. In 1541, Jesuit co-founder Francis Xavier set sail for Goa. Xavier wasn't coming to preach. He was coming to uproot paganism by any means necessary. Francis Xavier arrived in 1542 with a single goal: to stop the superstition and idolatry. He looked at the Hindu population and saw only devil worshippers. He specifically targeted the Brahmins because he considered them as the keepers of language, ancient culture, and knowledge. He believed that if he could break the Brahmins, the rest of the civilization would collapse. But here's the thing: even before the Inquisition began, the groundwork had already started. Xavier's collaborators, Vicar General Miguel Vaz and Diego Borba, began a policy called rigor de misericordia, the rigor of mercy. The logic was chilling: use force to save people so that they could receive the grace and mercy of Christ. In 1540, the destruction of temples began in earnest. On the island of Goa, every Hindu sanctuary was razed to the ground. Portuguese officials met the local leaders and gave them a terrifying ultimatum: the temples would never be rebuilt. Instead, the income from these temples was used to fund local churches and chapels, and St. Paul's College, an institution to specifically train the new convert. But a new problem emerged. Jewish converts to Christianity, called New Christians, had fled to Goa to escape the Portuguese Inquisition. After encountering India's ancient Jewish communities, many began returning to their ancestral faith. In 1545, Francis Xavier lobbied the king for the Inquisition, claiming subjects were living by Jewish law without fear of God. By 1560, the viceroy ordered all Hindus to convert or leave Goa within a month. If they stayed and refused the cross, they were sentenced to life as galley slaves. Conversions happened via physical force, moral cowardice, or the desperate desire to keep jobs and properties. Historians note that almost none came from convictions. This sparked a mass exodus. Thousands of Hindus walked away from their homes, leaving their ancestral fields to flood and their village to rot. Yeah, but that wasn't enough. The church was hell-bent on launching a systematic psychological warfare. After decades of intense lobbying, the Pope blessed the Holy Inquisition at Goa. Elixir Diaz landed as the first inquisitor. All high offices of the Inquisition were reserved for old Christians of pure blood, white Europeans. The office of second inquisitor was always reserved for a Dominican monk. Their jurisdiction was staggering, stretching from Africa to East Asia. In 1560, the Inquisition opened its door in the Adil Shahi palace. The locals called it Holigar, which means a big house. The inquisitors were the supreme judges who answered to no one but the king and the Pope. While the Inquisition was first launched to punish the new Christians who were lapping into heresy, it soon turned its eye towards native converts of Christianity and eventually Hindus themselves. The machine ran on three gears. First, the familiars, neighbors who spied for the church in exchange for a gold medal and the power to break down your door at midnight. Second, the promoter, the prosecutor who kept the files on your life, and finally the notary, the man who sat in the torture room and wrote down every shriek and every plea for mercy as a matter of cold bureaucratic fact. When arrested, the prisoners were not told the reason for their arrests or the name of their accusers. Instead, they were urged to confess. The accused were never confronted with the witness against them, making effective defense impossible. False testimony became a thriving trade used to gratify private enemy. Inside the palace, they enforced perpetual silence. A single sob in a cell invited a beating. Accusers weren't required to provide proof. They used the pole. Victims were hung by the wrist with weights on their feet, then dropped to dislocate their joints. They used the potro, water torture that simulated drowning while cords cut through the skin. Records show inquisitors even used the cells to imprison women to satisfy their bestial instincts, later burning them as heretics to cover the crime. It was a massive engine of theft. Upon accusation, the church seized everything, half to the accuser, half to the Holy Office. Victims who were acquitted seldom got their wealth back. Inquisitors derived personal profit from the sale of prisoners' wealth to cover secret expenses which no one dared to inquire about. While the native population starved, priests lived in luxury with native concubines. Now ask yourself, if the goal was to save souls, why was the first step to always take the victim's money? Every few years, they held the auto da fe, the act of faith, a public theater of horror where the reconciled wore yellow robes and the condemned wore grey robes painted with devils before being burnt alive. The legal assaults didn't stop at the palace walls. New laws prohibited Hindus from repairing damaged temples or holding public office. Laws were changed so that if a Hindu died without male heirs, his property was seized by the treasury unless his kin converted. The church had the fire, the law, and the fear. They expected total submission, but the villagers had a different plan in mind. The resistance in Goa was both bloody and brilliant. In 1583, Konkulam became the site of first organized revolt against colonial rule in Asia. 5 Jesuit priests and several officials entered the village to plant a cross on the site of destroyed temple. The villagers, led by Gaunkars, surrounded the Jesuits and killed them and stopped them from desecrating their land. The Portuguese responded with massacre. They called upon 16 Gaunkars to the fort for peace talks and locked the doors and murdered 15 of them in cold blood. And one of them jumped into the river only to tell the world the story and this cold-blooded massacre. As the temples fell, the people began a massive secret operation. In the dead of night, they smuggled the murtis of their gods across the river to territories outside Portuguese rule. Wealthy Hindus living in Portuguese territories used their earnings to build and maintain these new temples across the border to ensure their Kuladevtas were safe. The most evil weapon was the law of orphanhood. If a Hindu father died, church officials called the father of Christians had the legal right to kidnap the children even if the mother was still alive. Priests would storm houses and snatch away any boy under 14 or girl under 12. But here is the thing. It was also about extortion. Priests often demanded bribes. If they failed to pay, they would take away the children. These children were taken to the College of St. Paul, given Portuguese names, and forced to forget their families. This practice was so brutal that it became the primary reason for Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's hostility towards the Portuguese. In 1620, a severe order banned Hindus from performing marriages, and the Jesuit priests also snatched away the religious thread, which is also called as Janu, from the Brahmins. The inquisitors viewed the Konkani language as a vehicle for heresy. They claimed Brahmins controlled natives using Konkani. They banned the language in 1684 and publicly burned Marathi, Sanskrit, and Konkani books. But here is the thing, the strongest weapon wasn't the sword, but it was the economy. They had passed laws like Shendi tag, what you'd call a Catholic jizya, used for financial extortion by the Holy Office of the Inquisition. If you kept your traditional hair, you paid the church. Hindus were forbidden from riding a horse or a palanquin, and Hindu testimony held no weight in the court of law. They even criminalized the most basic human habits, like taking bath in the morning would be considered as a Hindu purity ritual, and that could get you arrested. The Inquisition was eventually cited as a major cause of decline of Portuguese empire in Asia, as it drove away the merchants and the capital necessary for trade. The resistance was holding the line, but for Inquisition to truly end, it needed an army. The spirit of people did not break. Thousands of Konkani-speaking families fled along the west coast, creating the vibrant diaspora communities that exist today. Even after the conversion, the racism never ended. Native Goan priests were often barred from high offices and often called racial slurs by Portuguese friars. But the Marathas were watching. They remained the only force capable of checking Portuguese bigotry. The military threat posed by Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and later his son Sambhaji, who nearly drove the Portuguese out of Goa entirely, was the only thing that forced the church to scale back its terror. Later, Peshwas continued this legacy of protection. Finally, Peshwa Bajirao and Chimaji Appa seized the Portuguese territories in the north, restricting the colonists to Goa and Daman. As part of the peace treaty, they negotiated for greater religious freedom for Hindus. Now look at what Chimaji Appa did next. It was an ultimate psychological warfare. As a humiliation for centuries of persecution, Chimaji Appa retrieved the church bells from Vasai fort and sent them to Hindu temples across Maharashtra. Today, those bells ring in temples like Bhimashankar and Menavali. In 1812, the Inquisition was abolished, but the officials burnt all the archives to hide 2 centuries of crime, but they failed. Charles Dellon, a French physician imprisoned there, published his first-hand account in 1687, exposing the machine's horrors to the world. Only after Goa's integration into India in 1961 did Konkani find a place in one of India's official languages. In 1987, it was officially recognized as the language of Goa, a true testament to the locals of Goa who were suppressed by the Portuguese. So you must be thinking, why is this personal to me? Because I belong to the Gaud Saraswat Brahmins community, and this is a story of my ancestors who fled Goa to preserve our religion, to preserve our culture, and to preserve our tradition. The Inquisition succeeded in the Americas in erasing native culture, but it failed in India. Today, the memory of these victims is often met with silence. In every other country where the Inquisition existed, there are museums. In India, there is none. Jesuits in the United States have recently apologized for their history. Yet, the Pope has never apologized for the crimes of the Goan Inquisition. Does the silence tell you everything about how the history is written? This is the story of people who faced the fire, the rack, and the silence, and remained unbroken.